You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, the beauty is last week, if you guys remember, well, actually for the last 2 weeks, we've been doing this whole series on what is Star Wars, what does it mean? It was actually your idea to do this. So, why don't you explain to them, to our wonderful audience, what the whole goal was, why you even thought this was necessary?
Well, I think every so often, we need to be reminded, especially in wake of a lot of different shows and a lot of different content that's being created. We need to understand, why we're here and what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And there's people like us who've been around the franchise for decades, and then there's some people who are just getting into it, and then there's some people who still aren't into it but maybe kind of curious about it. So I kind of want to go through like the basics of what Star Wars is. The foundation of the franchise, the lore behind it, and then of course the iconic films that have spawned off, into the Obi-Wan series and or things like that. People just need to have a wider cast, a wider net of information. So
Yeah, well, and it's
that's what
also,
this is all about.
I would think it's also remedial in some cases too, because even some of the older generation, they may have forgotten some aspects of it. It might have been so convoluted for people now that, everybody, it's always good to go back and cover the basics. So the first week that we did this 2 weeks ago, because we're doing this every Monday pretty much until we're done, and that is, we started out with the legacy of Star Wars. And again, we even created a specific playlist that the stuff is going in. So if you guys missed any of this stuff, go back and check it out, catch up. You don't necessarily have to go in order with this stuff. So, don't stop this stream and go back. But pretty much we start out with the legacy. What makes Star Wars Star Wars? Kind of an introductory thing. We gave a little bit of history. We gave some of the key components that actually make Star Wars different from other franchises, and basically just remind everybody what Star Wars really is. So it gave us a little bit of a frame of reference and a foundation. And then last week, of course, we went through A New Hope. We decided to start with episode 4 because that was the first one that was released. And so we are going chronological. So we'll be doing 4 through 6, 1 through 3, maybe 7 through 9. And of course, we'll do some of the standalones too. I mean, we're basically going to pick all the key components. And in a way, you might be tempted to think that this is a review, but it really isn't. This is more, and this is why I always put this in the description of these videos. This is really an in-depth analysis and discussion on pretty much each of the films and how they played an important part in the bigger franchise. So this week, we're doing what has been considered not just the best Star Wars film, but also the best sequel of all time, and that is The Empire Strikes Back. So there's a lot to cover in this one. So we shouldn't probably waste any time, considering I think we went an hour and a half the last time, and
Yeah. Who knew these things would be so lengthy?
Well, but then again, I mean, if you think about it, we are really going in deep with these things. Now, for The New Hope, we had a PowerPoint that we basically had, so we had graphics to illustrate a lot of what we were talking about. For this one, we don't, only because I wanted to keep the discussion a little bit freer, a little bit less tied to a particular order. And of course, I also basically neglected to do it. So there is that. But I mean, honestly, I think it's a good, happy accident. So with that, we have, of course, this iconic image, which is when Luke and Vader confront each other on Cloud City. Now, it should be noted that one of the things that was really cool about The Empire Strikes Back was this is following the direct success of A New Hope. So we had a huge budget, comparatively speaking, for this film.
Hmm.
And of course, there were a lot of expectations that went into this one as well. So we basically start out with Hoth. Now, I know there was a bunch of stuff that you wanted to talk about when it came to the Battle of Hoth, so take it away.
Well, I mean, here we are, Empire Strikes Back, the probably arguably the greatest sequel of any movie franchise of all time. Um, Released in 1980. So I think that's right. And I see it.
It
77
is.
was A New Hope. Yeah,
Yep.
1980 was Empire.
And then
So
83 was Return of the
83 was
Jedi. Yep.
Return of the Jedi, right? So here we are, Empire Strikes Back. It opens up on this big snowball planet called Hoth. And we kind of see our heroes once again bound together. You got Han, Luke, and Leia, 3PO, R2D2. They're all kind of bundled up in this giant igloo base, basically trying to hide from the Empire. Because remember, this is coming off the base of the basis of the Death Star being blown up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the whole movie is called The Empire Strikes Back, is because, of course, the rebels destroyed the Death Star. So now the Empire is they're really looking for the rebels, because not only did they take out their main weapon, but they cost them a whole lot of money because that Death Star is very expensive. So, and they lost a lot of lives too. That's one thing that a lot of people don't really think about when you watch A New Hope, is that there were families on the Death Star. It's not just, it wasn't just an Imperial base for weapons and stormtroopers and all that type of stuff, but there were actually living quarters for actual families who were on that. So a lot of people lost loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah, they cover
Empire, of
this.
course.
They cover this brilliantly in that Lost Stars novel. I think that Claudia Gray's Lost Stars, even though a lot of times it gets dismissed as a young adult type of, almost
Mhm.
Nicholas Sparks in space kind of a thing, it really is a very deep novel, and it's really really good at what it does. And one of the things that it does is it humanizes the Empire, and it actually goes very much in depth about the Death Star, because a lot of the setup and the action and the characters, they actually have a whole group of characters who came up to the academy and all that and were stationed on the Death Star, and you got to know them and you followed them. And then of course, when Luke blows it up, you're actually, for a second, you're angry. You're like, wait, these idiots just killed some, my favorite characters. And that's one of the things, is that, yeah, it did a really good job at showing that, as we've often said, that, the Empire was the legitimate government at the time. And of course, they were doing a bunch of horrible things and they did need to be stopped, but not everybody not only did they not
Right.
subscribe to it, but they didn't even know about it. So
Yeah.
this is a really good point that you're making about the fact that people don't think that billions upon billions of lives were lost when the Death Star was blown up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people, like I said, and essentially the Death Star was the size of as they often mentioned in the movie, a small moon. So
Mm-hmm.
just think about it, like, a moon-sized space station holds probably millions of people,
Billions.
and so, yeah, so that was a big loss to the Empire on multiple fronts. So now the Empire's ticked off. They're trying to strike back. They want to find these rebels and get rid of them once and for all. So the rebels are hiding out on this snow planet called Hoth, and the reason why they're hiding on this snow planet is because um, there's no real life form there, and so they're hoping to use the cold and a lot of the environment to kind of mask their presence. They're more so underground, more so than above ground. So all their stuff is kind of central below, so the Empire can't get any readings on them, and so we kind of see this thing. They're trying to get adapted to a bunch of different things. They're trying to get their technology to work because of the extreme cold. Things aren't working much as it would in real life. If your car's out and
Yeah,
extreme
but here's the
temperatures
thing,
is.
and I've often wondered this, because
Hmm.
obviously, like you said, there's a lot of dialogue in the movie that indicates that they haven't been there too long.
Hmm.
That they pretty much just arrived there. I think Empire takes place a year after A New Hope.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's the timeline. Now, the thing that I've always been fascinated, there's a couple of things in The Empire Strikes Back. One, I'm legendarily fascinated about if you've watched the show enough. But one of the other things, and I don't talk about this much, is when did they build this thing? When did they actually have time to build the base? I mean, we know in A New Hope that they had the base of Dantooine and that base was abandoned because they all went to Yavin 4. They all went to that moon, one
Hmm.
of the moons on Yavin 4. So it's kind of like, okay, you're under the impression that pretty much, and Rogue One supports this too, by the way, is that pretty much the entire rebellion is stationed there. Now, it would stand to reason that they have other satellite, like garrisons here or there, or, basically different groups, because that's another thing that was established before they were all unified. You did have somewhat different factions, and that
Hmm.
probably still was maintained. But you have to wonder, was Hoth a base that they had created, like years ago, and they're just kind of like, well, we can fire that old base up again or whatever? Or was this a freshly built base that had to have been built while they were off doing what they were doing on Yavin 4?
I think so. I think it was one of those situations where, because after Rogue One, that's when they started unifying the whole rebellion, and I think you had people, they created like almost like outpost base. Like, okay, it's kind of like the state police. Like every so often, few cities, you'll see a state police, station or whatever. And I think that's kind of what they did here. Is they kind of decided to, on certain planets, but they kind of had to find, of course, remote planets where it's not as easy populated, and so the Empire wouldn't necessarily find them on certain planets. And they had to make it so it was a little bit more. They had the advantage, so they would try to find terrain that was a little bit more tumultuous or something like that. So that way, even if they are spotted, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the Empire to adjust or adapt to um, the situation, and they kind of have the home field advantage, as it were. So, um, so yeah, we're getting to the point now. We have Han and Luke. They're on these little animals called tauntauns, and they're riding around. And those animals are, trudging along pretty well, but they're really not built for that extreme cold. I don't know how cold Hoth was, but I mean, judging by the parkas and the fact that their tauntauns eventually freeze, it's pretty darn cold. um, so they're out here, and Lucas kind of checking on something while Han decides to go back, and then it gets to a point where Luke never checks back in because he's attacked by this weird Yeti or abominable snowman or whatever you want to call him. But this giant snow monster that's been living on Hoth
Yeah, they're
eventually
called
attacks Luke.
but it's called a Wampa.
Well, yeah, that's his actual name, but just for people to have a frame of
Well,
reference of what it looked like.
I'll tell you what it actually really resembles, and I can't unsee it every time, is when I watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the abominable snowman.
Yeah, that's why I said it. Like, it's the abominable snowman or a
I mean, it
Yeti. Some
does.
people,
Yeah, yeah.
that's exactly what it looks like.
Oh, by the way,
Um,
I did look this up.
mhm.
The temperature on Hoth was around minus 364 degrees Fahrenheit.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, there's no way. Mm-mm.
So, just saying.
Yeah, I'm gonna just let that go. So, but um, yeah. So now we have Luke. He's been kind of taken captive by the Wampa, and he's kind of has him dangling in his little cave. And of now Han is back at the base, and they're trying to make this decision of that he should go back out and look for him because it's getting too dark. And so he's like, all right, we don't know what's out there. We don't know what's going to come out, at nighttime, and he's out there by himself. It's freezing cold, as Eric just indicated. So what are we going to do? And they kind of decided that it was too dangerous for, um, well, Han decided to kind of go against everybody's wishes. By this point, and this was a good point that I wanted to make, is that at this point you can really see the relationship build between Han and Luke. Now they're kind of like best friends. And so, because Han makes a statement, like, yeah, well, it's getting dark out there, and snow is falling. He's like, yeah, my friend's in it. So I'm going out there to go get him. So
Yeah, that was
he goes
definitely a
out
good
there.
point. That's
Yeah,
can't even make that point strong enough because again, you have to understand there's a year that goes in between these two films. It's not like
hmm
what a lot of people think. Actually, a lot of people think that this is true with all of the Star Wars movies, that they basically take place,
one right after another.
either one right after the other, or, maybe a few days, a week, a month, or whatever's gone by. In this case, it's been about a year, so there has been
hmm
time for that and everything else. So, I'll let you go on. I'll obviously break in when, because again, it's not so much that, I mean, I guess in some cases we could do it, because we should talk about scenes and everything, but I want to make sure that, we're not sacrificing any discussion points just to give a blow by blow. Because first of all,
Oh yeah,
and
that's a lot.
anybody that's watching this show has probably seen the movie at least once.
hmm
If you haven't, to be honest, you're not going to get much out of this discussion because it's going to be really in depth. So if you haven't seen the movie by now, you might want to take care of that first. But there is some key points, and that's one of the good ones, is that you do see a little bit of growth between that relationship between Han and Luke in
hmm
particular. Really, all of them. They all
All of them,
become that
yeah.
Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie. Even the way he's familiar with 3PO now. He's always telling him to shut up and kind of ordering him around. And,
hmm
everybody kind of has that. You can tell they've been around for a while. But we'll get to Han
Yeah,
in a few, I'm sure. But by all
yeah.
means.
Yeah, I mean, Han is, he's being a friend, and this is one of the big things about character growth and development. Once again, it plays into why a lot of people find The Empire Strikes Back as one of the greatest sequels, is because you see the growth of the friendship, but also the growth individually. Because Han was, as we saw in A New Hope, was very selfish. He was more about self. He was always thinking about, what's best for me, and we saw at the very end that he did a selfless act, and that's carrying on into Empire, where now he's going after Luke in a selfless act where he's putting his life right once again on the line for a friend or a person he deems as a friend. So that's another big character development piece for Empire. So in the midst of this, he's going out looking for Luke. Luke is hanging in this Wampa's um, cave, and he notices that he's already been kind of battered when he got knocked off the tauntaun, but now he's hanging upside down. He notices that his lightsaber is maybe a few feet away from him. He's unable to reach it, and this Wampa, for whatever reason, is like he's finishing chowing down on this animal that he dragged in, and now maybe he wants some more. And so he's like, oh, I got Luke Skywalker hanging out back. Let me go get a snack of him. So Luke, this is the first time we actually see Luke actually using the Force. And this is the first time that we actually see the Force pull, as they call it, where he's able to use the Force to manipulate objects moving towards him. So he's able to use the Force and pull the lightsaber out of the snow into his hand, and is able to cut himself down from it, and then eventually slays the Wampa. Well, not slays him completely, but at least chops his arm off. So
Yeah, it's a big thing in Star Wars. I mean, that's what
yeah,
Obi-Wan did to, Walrus Man or whatever. So it's
true.
the
Yep.
arm thing. Of course, Dooku did that to Anakin. I mean, arms and hands.
Yeah, Chewie likes pulling people's arms out of the
He
sockets. I
like
mean, Wookiees.
exactly. He likes pulling people's arms out of the sockets. So it's an arm and hand kind of a world out there. You just have to be very, very careful when you're traversing through the Star
Yes.
Wars universe. Protect
Yes.
your arms and hands.
Yes. Make sure your arms and feet are
Inside the
tucked
ride at
in
all times.
all times. Right. So Luke finally makes it out of there, and then he eventually kind of, I guess, he passes out from either the extreme cold or some of his injuries he might have had, or a little, maybe a combination of both. But anyway, he ends up passing out, and as he's kind of fading there, he sees the silhouette. Well, he hears the voice first of his old master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then he kind of sees Obi-Wan as a in spirit form, or a force ghost, as we call it, speaking to him, saying, Luke, you must go to the Dagobah system. There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi master who instructed me. And Luke is kind of like, okay, am I dreaming or whatever? But then he eventually passes out. Fortunately, as the will of the Force would have it, Han runs into Luke just as he passes out,
Yeah, but let's not go
and
past
he's
this point
mhm,
because this is really important. This is the first appearance that we have of a fully fleshed out Force Ghost. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this scene is that, and of course, Daryl pointed this out last week, we first get the disembodied voice of Obi-Wan at the end of A New Hope, where he's talking to Luke, but he's not in a form. In this scene, we get Obi-Wan in kind of a ghostly, almost holographic sort of a form. And then by Return of the Jedi, which of course we'll bring that up next week when we talk about that, now we get a fully formed Obi-Wan Force Ghost where he's sitting on logs. He's pretty much looks physically there, except, he's got that aura around him. So this is the first time that we actually realize that, hey, just because you were cut down doesn't necessarily mean it's over for you. Now, at this point, we really weren't sure, well, is this something that only Obi-Wan can do? Do they just all die and go to Jedi heaven or something? I mean, we really didn't know what the whole point was or how this would play out. And of course, the expanded universe would have a field day exploring the whole concept of Force Ghosts and everything. And then it was picked up, of course, in Disney's canon, along with the sequel trilogy and everything else. So, yeah, this is definitely one of those things that is a really important point in Star Wars. It's a really key
yeah,
moment, actually.
definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. That was a very key moment. And then after Luke kind of passes out, Han, reaches him after surveying that his tauntaun had pretty much died because of being out in the extreme cold for so long. Han does one of the coolest thing, which Eric is probably one of his favorite moments of all time. And
Yeah,
I probably
man.
should probably let you tell it.
This really is, because again, and this is something that we had all thought, and keep in mind that, I'm coming from somebody that actually saw this in the theater in 1980, like opening day, dragged my parents out to do it or whatever. But we had always wanted to see Han Solo use a lightsaber for some reason. I don't know if it was because, he was kind of cool. It's like, well, Luke is kind of a punk, so Han should be able to use this. And, we actually had ideas of what if Han went up against Vader and, all this other stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of talk after A New Hope about what happened, what's going to happen in The Empire Strikes Back. And of course, I actually had a comic book. It was it's really what you would call a graphic novel more so now, although it was a soft cover. So it's like a really thick comic. And it came out, I don't know, like a couple of weeks. It was really weird. They released it a couple of weeks before um, Empire Strikes Back came out. And on our Facebook page, it's probably on our Instagram too, you can actually see the little 10-year-old me, or actually I was 9-year-old me standing on the porch holding this comic. I actually put it on our page because there's a lot of people that didn't even think it existed, but it definitely existed. And of course, it revealed, the whole Luke and Vader relationship and everything else. And I tried to tell my friends this, and nobody believed me. Well, one of the things that was really cool, though, was actually seeing Han using that lightsaber. Even though all he was doing was cutting open a tauntaun, I realized that. I realized this wasn't some epic battle, but there was still just something otherworldly about seeing Han igniting a lightsaber and using it at any capacity, you know? Especially because he was just
Yeah.
bagging on the Jedi in the last movie. And I remember we were even thinking, like, okay, dude, this is like a Jedi. Do you know where lightsabers come from? Did you ever maybe stop and think? And there was just all kinds of connections, especially in light. And I did not bring this up last week, and I should have. Is the fact that one of the discrepancies that was started by Lucas actually when he made the prequel trilogy, and of course he had the Wookiees were fully a part of the Republic, and they basically helped the Jedi fight on the Battle of Kashyyyk, and Chewbacca knew Yoda. We find out at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and then of course you had the Wookiee Jedis. There's at least 2 of them now that we know of. You gotta think that Chewbacca, when Han was spouting off about all this stuff, that he would have raised his little paw or whatever and just been like, hey, listen, I'm not trying to rain on your parade here, but I got some things.
Well, I don't think Chewbacca was in the room at that time when they were having that conversation. Maybe I have to look at it again, but I'm
Yeah,
not sure
that's a
that
good
at that
point.
moment, I don't think Chewbacca was in there. He might have been piloting the ship or something, but
I don't.
maybe that's why that
I
didn't
think he
happen.
was
But
in the room
mm,
because I think that was when he said, "No, you know what? I thought that was the same scene as the. I don't know. A lot of those
pulling
scenes do
arms out
blend
of
together.
sockets.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's like you better let him win, and then Obi-Wan was like, "Okay, get on with your exercises or whatever." So he was in the room. Again, this is one of those things, and we have brought this up before with fantasy, broad strokes. Don't
Right.
super analyze it, even though that's essentially what we're doing right now. I mean, this whole in-depth discussion is part of that. And again, you guys, if you're watching this live, you can jump in and chat on this too, or ask any questions about the films or whatever. It's fine. But okay. So yeah, that was actually one of the cooler scenes, I thought. Now, I did not know, as a side note, when he was putting Luke in the tauntaun, I had no idea that this was taken from the whole idea that, they would cut open horses and put you inside them, to keep you from freezing to death and stuff. I was not privy
hmm
to that information, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much, disemboweled like this whole tauntaun. That's basically like a giant snow camel, if you will. Um, and Honda's like, okay, I'm gonna stick you inside this thing. It'll keep you warm. It stinks, definitely, but literally and figuratively speaking. But then Han decided to build the shelter, build a tent, and wait till morning. Um, and fortunately, when morning did come, the snow speeders that they had um, were able to be adapted to the cold, and they were able to actually pick up Han and Luke and transfer them back to the base, where Luke gets a very much needed back to tank session. And the back to tank essentially is a giant cylinder, um, almost like in a small aquarium type thing, but something like Harry Houdini would like lock himself in or something like that. But it's basically like this cylinder thing where you sit in or you're plunged in and you're covered in water, but you have, of course, if you're human or you can't breathe water, they put a um,
Well, actually, it is
respirator
Bacta.
on your.
It is like it's not actually, well, I mean, the reality
Well,
is
it's
it was
water,
water,
but
but
then it's water, but then there's also bacteria that's also mixed into it. That's you know allows you. It gives you the healing properties of the bacta fluid or whatever. But it's kind of like almost like if you've ever been in emergency, like an IV drip. Just kind of think
Yeah,
of that, just
what did
sitting
they
in the
call
side of an
it?
iDreamy drip.
What was that stupid name they gave it in Solo? It was like the precursor to Bacta.
Oh, forgot
Because I
the
was
name
like,
of
oh,
that. I
come
used to
on,
know it.
that was almost as bad
Yeah,
as the M count thing. Where I'm like,
right.
okay, guys, whatever. But you know what? But yeah, this is also the first appearance of 21B, which he was another one of those guys. He's kind of like Lobot for me. I don't know why I was always fascinated. I actually got the 21B action figure. I mean, it was weird. That one I admit is really strange. But, it was, again, we're seeing a little bit more of the technology. One of the things that I liked about Empire was the fact that it opened things up a little bit. You're getting bigger set pieces. You're getting, of course, like you said, now we're seeing a snow planet. Because, I mean, up until then, think about it, we really only saw Tatooine. Of course, little did we know that, that would be a planet we would go a lot in the Star Wars universe. But this is the first time where we got to see a different terrain. And there's actually a couple, really. So, as far as just, if you compare A New Hope to The Empire Strikes Back, you're getting a lot more of the world, right? It's every bit as good for world building, if I can talk, than it is for character building. Because you're actually getting both. And what I find interesting, and this is true especially in later scenes, is that you're getting all this more open world type stuff, right? Where you're seeing more of the universe, you have these bigger set pieces, there's all this different stuff. But then at the same time, you're also closing in on it. A lot of action takes place in the cockpit of the Falcon. Or, in this little area, by Yoda's cave. Or, this one area where they're doing the carbonite freezing and all that. There's all these, like, little more claustrophobic scenes mixed in. So I thought that was really cool, too.
Yeah, in the midst of this technology, we have, as Luke is recovering from his injuries, Han goes to, pay him a visit along with Leia and 3PO and R2, and they're all just concerned about him and checking on him to see how he's doing. This is when we get one of the more, shall we say, unsettling moments in Star Wars where,
Oh,
and it doesn't
yes.
seem so at first.
No, but, the
It
funny
doesn't
thing,
seem so initially.
not in this film. Because we don't get the big reveal until the next film.
Right.
But I will say, I remember when we saw it was only about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks or whatever, that was the 7-year anniversary, of us going to see the marathon, where they showed episodes 1 through 6, and then The Force Awakens premiered. So that was the first time, and I remember when we would see that scene in Empire Strikes Back, everybody's like, "Oh, oh,"
And it is, like I said, it doesn't seem gross at first, but the scene we were referring to is the fact that they're having this whole exchange, and Han is being Han, giving his smart remarks, and Leia just plants this big juicy kiss on Luke. And normally, everybody, after, if you just saw A New Hope, you're thinking like, okay, he rescued the princess, hey, she's just happy he's back, and he's the hero. So yeah, she plants one on him, and everyone thinks that, okay, cool. Even Han made the joke of, it's like, all right,
I'll laugh
I
it up,
forgot exactly
fuzzball.
what it was. No, not that one.
Oh,
It was that he's a, "We'll see you around, kid." He been kind of just sarcastically dismissed it like it didn't happen. That was the funny part. He's like, "Yeah, we'll see you around," and then he walks off. But the reason why that becomes so disgustingly awkward for us is because later on in the series, in Return of the Jedi, we find out that Luke and Leia are brothers and sister.
not only that, they're
So
twins. I mean, when you
yeah,
really
it's
stop and
that.
think about it, it's even more sick.
Ex-
I mean, you kind of would think that they would almost have a Back to the Future moment, where she was kind of like, oh, it's kind of like kissing my brother, It's none of that. But I mean, the interesting thing though that I thought was cool, again, because we're basically going in order here, and we're just keeping things as they are. So we're just pretending like this is the 1980 to 83 viewing of this film. If you just take that scene for what it is, it does introduce an interesting love triangle between Han, Luke, and Leia. Because you knew that, and again, even when you go back to A New Hope, because we didn't really bring this up either, where they had that whole conversation where, Leia is talking to Han about, how there was such an ease of escape, and they get into a little bit of tiff, and there's like kind of a sexual tension there, sort of. And then, of course, Luke comes in, and he's sort of expressing a little bit of interest, and that's when Han's like, well, I don't know. You think a princess and a guy like me? He's like, no. But there are two things that fascinate me. And again, this is an in-universe thing, is you think the Force would be like, yeah, no. No. We're not going to have these feelings.
Well, I think like we always say, in universe, you hope that might have happened, but hey, maybe that thing is coming out, in that time period. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, let's get to this one comment before we go on.
Go ahead.
With David here. He says, "Hello, gentlemen. I watched it for the first time. It was interesting to see Vader betray the greatest of all time to Luke and ask him for his help in overthrowing him. Vader was vulnerable and fatherly. Good writing." Yeah, I mean, but it's not really a betrayal, though, because one of the things about the Sith that's actually makes them kind of cool in a lot of ways is the fact that they're always trying to betray each other. That's expected. In fact, Palpatine would have been mad at him if he didn't try to do that.
It's actually encouraged.
Yeah, it's encouraged, because that's how the Sith... The idea is that you become the new master when you're powerful enough to overthrow your old one. And
right.
The idea behind the Sith is that if I'm too weak, then I don't deserve to be the master then. It's kind of like, okay, if my apprentice can overthrow me, hey, he earned it. And that's why there's that constant craving of power with the Sith Lords, is because you got, how did it go? Like one to have the power and the other to crave it, or something like that. So, that's basically how it goes. And, this is not the first time. We find out later, which I'm pretty sure the whole, what's his name? Star Killer or something like that, from the Force Unleashed games. I think those have been canonized. But even still, there's all these examples of Vader constantly trying to get an apprentice to help him overthrow the Emperor. However, when you sense the power in Luke, you got official permission, by saying in the whole hologram conversation, like, hey, if we could turn this guy. Because at first, the Emperor's all like, the son of Skywalker should not live. And Vader's just kind of like, well, let me see if I can get him to soften his stance on that. He basically tempts him with, yeah, but what would happen if we turned him to the dark side? Now you got, Anakin, his kid, and the Emperor. They'd be unstoppable at that point. I mean, even Leia wouldn't be able to take all those people on.
Yeah, well, even in that discussion, I mean, and this is where it all works in Palpatine's divine order. Because if you look at the cards that he's dealt, it's either this. It's like, okay, either Vader gets Luke to, join to the dark side, and they try to overthrow me, and if they do, then good, because then, they did what they were supposed to do, right? But if Luke beats Vader, well, then now he has a new apprentice in Luke Skywalker.
Exactly. And that's probably
If
more
Vader
what
beats
Palpatine
Luke,
was thinking.
Yeah, that's why he let it happen. He's like, well, or if Luke or if Vader beat Luke, then it just proved that Vader was still the strongest. So he still
Hmm.
has the best apprentice. So either way it goes, it works in Palpatine's favor.
Well,
And
and not to mention,
he was literally holding all the cards, which is why David probably reveres him as the GOAT.
which, of course, he
Because
was saying, what? The GOAT wants to die? Vader, kill me. I'm proud of you. That's insane. But that's...
well, that's the Sith though. I mean, you have to understand it's kind of like it's almost like being a father, right? And you always want, and David, you probably can attest to this now that you have a new bouncing baby boy. Um, you want your son to be better than you. You want your son to be able to the things you were able to do in this life. You want your son to be able to do more and exceedingly and abundantly more than what you were able to do with his own gift, talents, and things that he's learned and taken from you. Take that to the next level. And so, and every father knows that their time is finite. Like, okay, my time is going to set on me, and you're going to have to rise up and be the better version of me. So that's essentially the dark side. That's their philosophy. It's like, okay, if you're better than me, if you can beat me, then I don't deserve to have this role because
Right.
you're better.
Well, and not to
So I
mention the
need to get
fact...
out. I need to be completely out of your way then.
Well, and then again, too, you also had to remember that Palpatine wasn't like... He wasn't really as honor bound as a lot of the other Sith Lords were either. I mean, he basically had so many different contingencies that,
Sure.
he wasn't... Look, I mean, look at what happened canonically, even though he was killed. He just came back. I mean, he basically had his little Sith spirit running around until he found somebody that was worthy. Now, if you go to the old expanded universe, his whole plan back then was, I've got infinite amount of clone versions of me that he had made. And so once he was killed, his essence, if you will, would just go into another one of his clone bodies and it'd be like nothing ever happened. So every era of Star Wars, whether it was the old era with the expanded universe, whether it's the whole Disney thing, there's all different kinds of ways that Palpatine was basically cheating death. That's why he was so obsessed with immortality, was because he didn't want to be defeated, even if he was naturally defeated in battle. I mean, this is the same guy who basically was like, okay, this before the Final Order was impacted, which is, of course, what Kylo Ren was running. His idea was that if he was killed, then the Empire didn't deserve to go on. So essentially what was happening was, if you had a situation where Palpatine was defeated, what was to happen was there was this beacon or something. This is covered in the Aftermath books, by the way. There's this beacon that would go off that would essentially call all the Empire to Jakku, where essentially there was this big bomb or something that would have just wiped out the entire Empire. And the idea that Palpatine was basically like, look, if I die, then you guys are no longer worthy to be around. And then that's when you had the First Order and the Final Order. So this is really a thing, by the way. And then I have to put this one up because Ronaldo has weighed in. Good to see Ronaldo back with us. Ronaldo says, "Hey everyone, Happy New Year. Love your hat, Daryl."
Thanks, man.
Yeah, well. Okay, so then Ronaldo follows that up with this other comment. He says he came back 2 times in the EU, right? Yeah, I think so. It maybe even more, because there was the Dark Horse comic version, and then there was the version that happened later on or something. They even dealt with it a little bit in the whole Thrawn trilogy, the Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, where they outlined some of the plan. Even though Thrawn was essentially taken over, and you had that weird Joris Baoth or whatever his name was, that was kind of the weird mad Jedi Master, and he was a clone of some Jedi that came before him. So there have been a lot of instances in the expanded universe where they did bring Palpatine back for a time. And then, of course, Luke had to defeat him again. So, yeah, I mean, the whole Palpatine coming back is nothing new, even back then. But what they decided to do now was just, hey, let's put it in canon form. Let's make it where he did come back. And hopefully save the Disney version of the franchise. Had to throw that in there.
All right. That's the thing about, the Empire Strikes Back. And, now that we have, a little bit more discussion, I think we can probably bounce around a little bit more, and we don't have to necessarily go so play by play. But one of the things I did really enjoy about, the sequel is the advancement of course, the characters. We see the advancement of Han, being not being so selfless. We also see the advancement of Vader in this, because in this film, he's a whole lot more ruthless he's choking people left and right. I mean, of course, my favorite one was, when he got Admiral Ozzel because he brought the ship too close to the system and the rebels were able to detect the ship. So Vader has a low tolerance in this because, of course, once again, this is off the heels of this Death Star being blown to bits. Vader's like, okay, I'm irritated now, and I'm the military leader now. It's no longer Tarkin. I'm the guy, so I'm have to make sure because I don't want to fail and I don't tolerate failure. And if you fail me, you will pay for it. And that's essentially where Vader is at this time. So it's kind of like the gloves come off, and if you fail him, he gives you a task and you blow it. 9 times out of 10, you're probably getting choked. So that's one of the things that I really did love about the advancement of Vader in this particular
Oh, yeah.
film.
Yeah. You cannot understate the advancement of Vader in this because, on one hand, the way that we saw him in A New Hope, and we talked about this on last week's show, was the fact that he was very much, I mean, he was powerful. You could tell that, but he was still somewhat subservient. He was under Tarkin. Tarkin was definitely in command of the military. He would only tolerate so much, but at the same time, he did have to toe the line a little bit. He still had to prove himself a little bit. And after the whole Death Star blew up, which, you would think he might have gotten a little bit of blame for that. But again, that was a Tarkin, Mahdi. There's a couple other guys. Like I can never remember the guy's name. Ronaldo, I know you know. There was the one guy that was at that table during the board meeting of A New Hope. And he actually appeared in comic form. It was like a prequel to Empire. And he basically was in charge of the military, but he was killed. And that's when Vader took it over. And when Vader took over the military, he was not playing. He was choking everybody left and right. He was, it was a one and done. You didn't really get a chance to fail. Except it looked like, and you probably, did it seem to you like he kind of had a little bit of a soft spot and a little thing for Piet? Because,
Admiral Piet was kind of like his guy.
Yeah, he kind of, there were some things that, I mean, if it was anybody else, it would have been choked out. But he's like, no.
Yeah, Captain Nita got wasted
after one failure. All he did was let the Falcon go, and I mean, it wasn't like it was some, careless thing. I mean, they floated away with the garbage. I mean, it was a smart move.
Well, no, it was before that. It was actually when they actually attached themselves to the hull of the
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because they could have gotten away
and the
ship that small.
Yeah, and it's like, well, track them. And he was like, Captain, they no longer appear on our scopes. And it's like,
yeah, and he's the guy that's all like, okay, I will inform Lord Vader myself.
Yep.
Well, I think he actually thought he was going to get brownie points, though. I thought that he thought, yeah, you know what? If I take full responsibility, that it might go okay. Well, Admiral Ozzel tried to, be like, oh, well, I thought I was doing. No, he was going to admit, look, I made a mistake. I'm going to admit it. I'm going to man up.
Right, and he actually apologized for it. Like,
I know.
Like, he's being humble about it. Like, look, I don't know what happened, but
Then it
Yeah,
was
Vader
apology
wasn't
accepted, Captain Nita.
Captain Nita,
And
as
he
he's
drops. But Piet, though, he seemed like, Piet's kind of my guy. Like, I'm going to give this
yeah.
guy a break. He's not a bad guy,
Either
you
that,
know?
either that, or maybe at that time, that's when Vader got the email from the Emperor where he's like, "Look, man, you got to stop choking people out. I can't replace these people fast enough. I'm doing these battlefield promotions like left and right because you keep getting angry at everybody. Like, I get it, they're failing, but we kind of need qualified people. I can't just be throwing anybody up here now."
It's like, yeah, just
So,
remember that, Mr. Death Star. I'm sure that probably, How about I choke you out for, costing me all that money or whatever. But yeah, I mean,
exactly.
it is. I mean, there's definitely some stuff, and Vader may have overcorrected a little bit, but I don't know. I thought it was cool. Actually, Empire was probably the best Vader depiction.
Oh yeah.
You know. All right, so we got a couple of chats. David says, "I love you, I know. It was nice finally seeing it in context." So, is Han dead? Well, apparently he hasn't seen
Yeah, he hasn't seen the sequels. He wanted to watch them. But yes, Han is actually not he's not dead in that if you're talking about in the context with the carbonite, no. He's not dead. If you're talking about does he eventually end up dying? Yes. So to that question.
and even then, he
Um
finds a way to make another appearance. I
yeah.
mean, the fact that we get a Force Ghost Han is still messing with my mind, but and the
Well, I
interesting thing
won't say
about
it's a
that whole
force ghost.
well, I know, but it kind of looks
I
like it.
no,
They drew it
he
up
looked
like
like
it. If
he
you
looked like regular
rewatch
Han.
if you rewatch that scene, they gave him the blue aura and the whole shot. He looks like a Force Ghost. It
All right.
was
I'll take you on
pull
that
up
one.
a still of it. I mean, we'll see. I could be
Um
wrong.
but the next thing I really want to kind of cover was, we got some new
All right.
characters in
Then I'm gonna get
Empire.
back to the chats.
Okay, because I'm assuming they're blowing up now. Um, so the advancement of of Empire was really cool, and it was definitely done by one of the greatest characters of all time. It was the first time we get the chance to see Master Yoda, and Lucas was told to go to Yoda, was told to go to Dagobah to meet Yoda by Obi-Wan while he was kind of passing out in the snow there on Hoth. And so when Luke finally gets there, he's kind of scouring the planet trying to find this Yoda. And, he has a very interesting encounter with him because Yoda doesn't initially reveal himself to him initially. So when Luke finally does come to the realization who he's speaking to, now he's like, oh, wait. Well, yeah, now yeah, I'm like he's all anxious and he wants to start beginning the training, but Yoda kind of senses that he has no patience, and Yoda was definitely correct in that. And at that point, Yoda begins to start to teach him some things, starts to explain the Force a little bit more in depth to him, and um, actually does some pretty cool stuff. Like when he actually lifted the X-wing out of the swamp. Like I remember as a kid, I was when I first saw that scene, I was just like blown away because like I said, up until that point, you really hadn't seen anybody do anything
Mm-mm.
supernatural that great with the Force. You saw like, okay, a Jedi mind trick here. Luke was able to pull the lightsaber to his hand. Vader
Right.
was able to choke people with the Force. Okay, those are all fine, well and good, but to lift an entire spacecraft that has been swallowed up by the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did he lift it out of the water, but he flew it across the swamp and blended it perfectly. And Yoda's all of like 3'5". He's like this
Well,
little itty bitty stuffed animal sized being, but he was able to use the Force, and he basically gave Luke the instructions of size matters not, and one of the greatest lines of do or do not, there is no try, To which Luke was like, of course he saw Yoda perform this miraculous act, and he's like, I don't believe it. And Yoda replied, that is why you failed. And man, those are just, Yoda just kept dropping nuggets like one after another on this.
Yeah, well, that movie,
and
because if you think about it, in Return of the Jedi, of course, we'll get to that next week, and properly, but, this was really Yoda's really meaty appearance here. He had a little bit of revelations and stuff like that in Return of the Jedi, and certainly, sure, you had some stuff in the Clone Wars, but he wasn't really dispensing a ton of wisdom. Not like in Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back pretty much is where all those little Yoda-isms pretty much reside, and I think that one of the important things, and this sometimes gets lost, is the fact that because we've been exposed to the prequel trilogy, because we've had all the animated series, there's a lot of different things now where we've seen a lot of what the Force can do, or at least even through pop culture, we've heard a bunch of stuff. Whereas in The Empire Strikes Back, going by what Daryl was saying, not only hadn't we seen this in the previous film, but even when you look at the earlier stuff, like you said, when Luke used telekinesis to bring his lightsaber to him when he was trapped by the Wampa, or even when he was training and he was lifting rocks and he ended up lifting R2. Well, those are some kind of cool things to where, as the audience, much like how Luke is getting introduced to everything the Force can do, so is the audience. We're learning about the Force right along with Luke. And to talk about that X-Wing thing, when the X-Wing is lifted out and then it's basically flown and then perfectly landed, we're just as blown away as Luke is. And I think that that's one of the coolest things that they did, was we're pretty much looking at everything through Luke's eyes. And that's one of the things.
We're on the journey with him.
Yeah, we're on the journey with him, exactly. And that's one of the things that I thought The Empire Strikes Back did so brilliantly. There's a couple other things along the way, too. Along with Vader, we also saw that big, powerful Star Destroyer he has. And that thing is, the Super Star Destroyer. That's when we're introduced to that. We're introduced to snowtroopers. In addition to widening the locations and things like that, we're also introduced to more of the world. Again, it's more of a world-building thing. So you're seeing a little bit more of the Empire with Star Destroyers and Super Star Destroyers and all these other things that they have. The AT-ATs. We didn't really go over that with the whole big Battle of Hoth and stuff like that. That was insane. So, there's a lot of... It's not just eye candy. You're actually expanding a lot of the machinery, the technology, the weaponry, all of this stuff. So all this stuff is really... And this is why the writing is so amazing, the directing's amazing, the acting. David brought up the whole I love you, I know thing. Actually, the original line was, I love you too. But of course, Harrison Ford went to Irvin Kershner. He's like, Han Solo wouldn't say that. So he improvised that line. When she said, I love you, and he said, I know. He just improvised that line, and they kept it because that was just so Han. All right, so before we go on, let's get to some more of these things. Ronaldo says, you can always see the terrified face of the Imperial officers when they fail. They know Vader will get them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
especially Captain Nita. When he's like, well, I'll inform Vader, I'll apologize for losing them. And it's just like, he knows it's like, I'm basically walking, the Green Mile at this point.
But don't forget, though. See, I don't know why, but I still think he thought he was going to survive because he said, prepare my shuttle, I think. Or prepare a shuttle or something. Like, it was almost like... Well, I don't know if he thought he was just going to tell him and run.
Well, no, he was on another ship.
Oh, you're right. Why. Yeah. That's what it was. He had to actually go to the Superstar. That's what it was. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so then Ronaldo also says Yoda is one of the reasons why I think the best way to watch Star Wars is the release order. It's also why we're reviewing them that way. If someone starts watching it from the prequels, it would be weird to see Yoda acting funny. There's actually a lot of reasons why watching them in episode order would be a little bit less effective. And that's one of many. He also says, get this up here, and also the surprise effect that Yoda's disguise only works if the viewer hasn't met him before. Yes and no, because I mean it's a little bit more effective, like you said, if you've never seen it and you just watch it in the chronological order that it was released. If you go 4 through 6, 1 through 3, 7 through 9. But it's still somewhat effective because if you think about it, if you had already seen all the stuff that Yoda did, right? If you see Yoda basically being the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, if you see Yoda fighting Dooku, Yoda fighting Palpatine, all these things that he's done, and then you see him confronting Luke and kind of acting silly and stuff, now you're going to have even a weirder, deeper appreciation because you're just going to be like, man, if Luke only knew who he was talking to, you know, he wouldn't have this. So in a way, in a bizarre way, either order can enhance the experience. What you're saying is that if you don't know who he is, then once again, because the movie is designed to have the audience experiencing this with Luke, you learn that he's a Jedi Master along with Luke. However, if you do it the other way, where you watch 1 through, 5 now in this case, then you have that type of technique where we're watching the characters learn, but we as the audience, it's like we're in on the little secret, right? Now we're seeing it through Yoda's perspective. If you watch it, episodes 1 through 4 first, and then you watch episode 5, now you're looking at things through Yoda's perspective because you've spent all this time on this adventure with Yoda, and now we're meeting up with him again in episode 5. So it really either experience could be equally satisfying. It just depends personally where you land on that.
Well, yeah, for me, I just think that this was better because it gives you the opportunity, a sense of wonderment, right? It keeps you in that space where, okay, you don't like, okay, Yoda's this Jedi Master, because quite frankly, we were never able to see what the Force could really do. Like when we saw Obi-Wan, okay, he did the Force, mind trick, and we saw him ignite the lightsaber and kill little Walrus Man, and um, in a cantina, right? But using the Force, well, there was the whole manipulating the stormtroopers when he made that little sound while he was deactivating the
Yeah, but do you know how long it took me before I really connected? Well, first of
connected
all,
that
here's the thing though.
he deactivated the tractor beam.
Yeah, but here's the thing that's funny. That was actually added in later. That was not in the original version.
I didn't know that.
No, that's the thing. That's why, because, I remember as a kid, right? He waves his hand, and then the stormtroopers are like, what was that? And I'm like, yeah, what was that? What are you talking about? And so, I think it was there, but I think in the special edition, it was one of them where they really enhanced it to where it was
maybe they enhanced the sound, yeah, because I had it on my VHS tapes when I was a kid, so I don't...
Yeah, I mean, it was like a weird, it was kind of a weird thing. And, you got to remember back then, I mean, Dolby Stereo or something was like brand new or whatever. So, I mean, it may not have come through, but I do remember that it was really strange. And then, of course, they did revisit that trick in the Obi-Wan series, which I thought was kind of a nice little nod. But you're right. I mean, there was very limited uses of the Force in A New Hope. And then even up to the point to where you get to the Dagobah training, limited uses there too. Now you got to talk about the whole cave scene, man.
Oh, of course, but yeah. So then the other thing is that there's a moment where now Luke is a little bit more like, okay, locked in. Now he's a little bit more serious. It's like, okay, now I see what's possible. Okay, now how do I get to this level, right? And so then, you know, Luke kind of senses the fact that he feels the dark side in this particular area, and so he wants to go explore it. And he starts, bringing his utility belt that's got his blaster and whatever else with him, along with his lightsaber. And he asked Yoda like, "What is there?" And he was like, um, something with the dark side. And he's like,
Only what you take with you.
he's only what you take with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then so Luke
So what does
eventually
Luke do?
and he takes his stuff, he takes his lightsaber and the
Straps on the
blaster with him.
weapons. Yep.
Yep, and once again it was another test for Luke. And so Luke goes down there, and then
Well, before that, don't forget that Yoda tried to give him a second chance. He said, "Your weapons, you will not need them."
Yeah.
Luke's like, puts the belt on. Look, if he had thermal detonators and all kinds of stuff, he probably would have gone down there too. Anybody would have.
That is true. Yeah, Yoda did warn him that he didn't need his weapons. And instead of not, once again, it just showed that Luke still didn't completely trust Yoda to that degree. So Luke, of course, once, like Eric said, straps on the weapons, goes down to the cave, and he's encountered what he thinks is Darth Vader. And so he ignites his lightsaber, and they get into this very slow lightsaber duel, and then Luke ends up lopping off the head of Vader. And as a kid, I'm like, how the heck did Vader find him? Like, and how did he know he was there? And
I said the same thing. I'm like, really? Well, I kind of expected a bunch of stormtroopers to pop out, although the clue was that whole kind of slow motion thing that was going on.
Well, I thought they were just enhancing the fear thing. I thought that was just like,
I mean, it could have gone either way.
The surprise on Luke's face, because I'm like, what does he see? And then he's backing up, and then that's when you see Vader walk out, and you're like, holy, So I'm like, uh-oh, how's he gonna?
That's so funny. I thought the same thing. Like, how'd you find him? And how'd you get in the cave? Like, how'd you even fly? I mean, I had questions.
And how did Yoda not sense him?
Right?
There's so many questions I had. Now I'm talking like Yoda. So many questions.
Have I?
But as Luke, lops off the head of this Vader, it explodes. The front of the mask explodes, only to reveal that it's Luke's face in there. And I thought that was really creepy. And I was like, okay. And Luke is kind of staring at the thing. You could tell he's weirded out by it. And as you can, then they kind of do this cool cutaway where you see Yoda kind of bowing his head and like it's almost like in sadness and kind of worry, like, oh boy.
Yeah, he's got some work ahead of him.
Yeah, so it's like, all right. So, and that whole scene was to illustrate basically that, Luke, if you allow your fears and to overwhelm you, this is your fate. You will end up just like Vader. That's the whole that's why Yoda told him, like, you don't need your weapons. Only what you take in there with you. And what Luke took into that cave was his fear. And that's what manifested in that cave was Vader. Because that's what led his father to the dark side, was fear.
Well,
so I thought that was, you don't get that sometimes you don't really get that until you get a little bit older. Because as a kid, I really didn't get that until I watched it like a million plus
you get
times.
You get like the macro version, right? Like you get the concept, but you don't get the details. But here's the thing too, and I'll say this. This also enhances Ronaldo's point a little bit. Whereas a lot of that is enhanced when you're seeing the prequels and Anakin's fall. Because even though at this point, technically, you don't know that Vader is Luke's father.
Right.
If you're watching up to this point, well, you know what? That's not even true, actually, because, I mean, Padme had the kids, Luke, Leia. I mean, that little twist is kind of blown, actually, if you do watch the prequels first. But it does enhance those scenes, because first when Yoda first meets him and he he kind of like spazzes out on Obi-Wan in the cave, basically like, just like his father, just, and starts going
They're
off.
running around. Yep.
Well, you understand the true context of that conversation by seeing the prequels first, and then of course the whole failure at the cave. You go, another Anakin. He's his kid, all right. You get a little bit of that, and then of course Yoda's just like, I mean, on one hand, we do kind of have to train this guy, but on the other hand, what if he does get tempted by the dark side and then he joins them? Then what are we gonna do? Somebody call and see what Jar Jar's doing. We can send Leia with like a bunch of Gungans or something to, get some cannon fodder out there, so while he's frying them with his lightning or something, you know what I mean? I mean, you do have to think about, and you brought this up actually in the last episode. Why didn't they start when he was younger? Now, of course, the Obi-Wan series does put a little bit of a spin on that, because you don't really want to get too chummy with the kid, because when you got all these Inquisitors and all this stuff, still hunting Jedi, you have to really, the Empire has to really think that the Jedi are extinct and they're nothing to worry about before you start training a kid whose last name is Skywalker. Just saying.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, while all this is going on, on Dagobah, our other heroes, Leia and Han and Chewie and R2 and 3PO, they're running for their lives from the Empire at this point. So they're just pretty much trying to, do whatever they can to kind of get away from the Empire and create some distance between them. And until they run into this asteroid field. And in the midst of this asteroid field, Han makes the gutsy move to say, we're going to actually go into the asteroid field because they'll be stupid to follow us in there. Well, 3PO had other things.
Never underestimate the
about
power, the stupidity of the Empire.
Right. 3PO kind of had some other reservations about that. And, he tried to tell Han the odds of them surviving out there, which I can see why, because, you got asteroids flying all over the place. It's probably from Alderaan, but, they're trying to navigate through this massive asteroid field. And eventually Han settles into this, what he thinks is a giant cave. And he figures like, okay, we'll sit down here, try to fix the ship up a little bit. Maybe the Empire would eventually give up and then kind of retreat, and then that way they can kind of find their way out of this asteroid field and go to safety. But no, Vader, being Vader, he's like, asteroids don't concern me. I want that ship found. Do what you got to do, basically. So now they're dropping these bombers, trying to, break up the ground.
Once again,
and hopefully...
you got the TIE bombers. This is the first example of TIE. So they're expanding characters, weaponry, technology, all this stuff. So, this is good stuff.
Yeah, and while they're doing this, now we start to see more of the romantic side of things between Han and Leia. And so that's eventually when they're working on fixing the ship. They finally share their first passionate kiss, and Leia is trying to resist the charms of Han, and Han sees that it's working, and he just keeps pressing the issue, and it eventually works. Han, once again, being the man's man he is, he really sells it. So then we get to, they're thinking that something's going on with the cave, and they're outside fixing the ship. And Han is like, well, this is weird. It's supposed to be a cave. Why is it moist? And there's no water out here. So why is the ground wet? And so he shoots his blaster, and he realizes the thing is moving around. And so then they kind of run back onto the ship and decide to take off. And then that's when they realize that they're not actually in the cave, but they're actually in the mouth of some weird animal. That they end up flying the Falcon out between the teeth of this animal, and they kind of find their way outside of the asteroid field. And then there's the Empire still right there waiting on them. And
Mm-hmm.
so now at this point, Han's got to do some quick maneuvering to kind of get them out, and the ship eventually takes a lot of damage. Han basically finds a way to land on the top of the Star Destroyer because they can't track their own ship. I mean, that would be stupid. And because the Millennium Falcon is so small compared to this thing, it looks like just a piece of the ship. Honestly, it looks like a satellite dish or something like that. But and prior to that, Vader was really adamant about finding them. So he even summoned a bunch of bounty hunters, one of them being the infamous Boba Fett, to actually find them. So when they're trying to hide on the ship, Han comes up with the brilliant idea. It's like, well, okay, before they jump to hyperspace, they'll dump all their trash, and we'll just kind of disembark from the hull of their ship, and we'll just kind of float away. And then once they jump to hyperspace, then we can find some place safe to go and repair our ship. And that's exactly what they do. Unbeknownst to them, though, Boba Fett is smart enough to kind of like, you know what? I'm gonna hang
Yeah.
out for a little bit,
Yeah,
and
he's seen that
something.
trick before.
Yeah. So
Um,
Boba is, I'm gonna hang around, and
Let me get to this before we get too far removed from the Yoda
Mhm.
stuff. Not to mention, I gotta talk about a few of these things. So Ronaldo says, I always wonder what would have happened if Luke didn't take his weapons. And that was something that I had thought of myself
Mm-hmm.
over and over. There's basically three mysteries in this thing that I always thought. One, of course, was the whole wow, I just forgot it like that quick. Whatever it was I brought up earlier. It's like one of the biggest ones. But whatever that was, what was that? You know what? Whatever. All right. So the next thing, the next thing was this. What would have happened if he didn't take his weapons into the cave? What would he have faced? Because we all know that was a dark side tree. And the whole idea was the dark side was concentrated in this one little tiny area. And it was similar. They tried to do a similar thing in The Last Jedi with that weird underground thing that Rey had to go into where she saw, all these mirrors and all this other stuff. So they were really trying to more or less rip off the whole dark side cave thing on Dagobah, which of course was done infinitely better. But I digress. But going back for a second, the Han and Leia thing, that was something that was a really big deal to me. And remember, on the last episode, I talked about how Han was instantly my favorite character, and, I kind of wanted to be like him and all this stuff. And there was just something, even though a lot of people had wanted Luke and Leia to get together because it's really more again, we were talking about the hero's journey. He's the hero, she's the damsel, that kind of a thing. And even though Lucas did sort of turn a few of those things around by making his damsel in distress very, very capable, very strong, she's still more or less, if you want to do the classic fantasy thing, she kind of fits that role. So the fact that she ends up with Han, because we didn't even talk about a couple of the things earlier where when they were still on Hoth, there was that whole big exchange where she'd be like, I just assume kiss a Wookiee, and he was like, you could use a good, or I could arrange that, you can use a good kiss. There was a lot of that familiarity, that comedy, where it sort of turned into a little bit of a romantic comedy there in the beginning. Whereas, and that continued even during the asteroid scenes, you basically had Han and Leia had this definite sexual tension going. And yet she was trying to resist because on one hand, she was finding herself more attracted to him, and she was starting to see the good side of him. But on the other hand, she was sort of like repulsed by the idea. The other thing going back too is that before they were escaping Hoth, Han was trying desperately to get the Falcon fixed. And of course, the commander at the time was talking about how he would hate to lose him and stuff. And, Han was just pointing out, like, look, there's still that price on my head. You remember back in episode 4, Greedo and every bounty hunter in the galaxy was looking for him because he had a price on his head. And this brings me up to the current scene, because one of the things that I had always thought was, man, if they had just let Han go temporarily before, the idea, though, was within that year between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, things just kept coming up, and it's like, okay, well, I'll pay off Jabba after this. Because remember, he got the money. He got all the money to pay off Jabba at the end of A New Hope. If he just had a chance to deliver those funds, all of this, it would have changed the entire last act of The Empire Strikes Back. And I don't know how many people think about that. If they had just let him do that. And that was the thing. I mean, even in this whole thing, if you remember, if you really dissect the story of The Empire Strikes Back, it's very simple. They started out on Hoth because they needed a place to, pardon the pun, cool out and kind of get their, just their bearings again, right? But then that stupid probe droid just happened to land there. And then, of course, Vader figured it out. If they had all listened to Ozzel would have just been like, yeah, it's too remote. They're not there. There's all these little chance encounters that led up to this. So when they end up storming Hoth and taking it over, then you have the idea where Han, Leia, Chewie, and 3PO go off, and because they couldn't get on a transport, remember, because they were staying behind. And then Luke and R2 went off. Now, after Luke sees the vision in the snow, he's kind of like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to catch up with you guys a little bit later. I got a little thing I have to do. And so they're trying to just go off to wherever the rendezvous point is, but they keep getting stuck, right? There's all these obstacles that are in the way, quite literally with the asteroids. So now you have Boba Fett after him. Because again, he just didn't have a chance to get the money to him. So, yeah, I just found it really interesting that you have, when you really start to think about this, below even the surface story, it really gets interesting and it really gets fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a story of kind of just mishaps or missteps along the way. It's one of those things where, like you said, if he was able just to get the money to him, a lot of things would have went in their favor. But because that didn't happen, but then that's good story writing, though. That's, you kind of have this thing that keeps unraveling, this piece of thread that keeps unraveling. And that's what made Empire so great, is because the more they tugged on this thing, it's like, okay, that unraveled, that unraveled, that unraveled, that unraveled. And it's like, okay, well, how are our heroes going to bounce back from all of this? And so, now we're at the point now where, Boba Fett is following Han and Leia to Cloud City, to where they meet up with another new character that we have come to grow and love, Mr. Billy D. Williams, playing Lando Calrissian. And Lando is I guess you can kind of call him an old friend of Han's, but they're more of a kind of a acquaintance more than a friend.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing here's what I don't get about that. And I'll just say this briefly, and then you can move on with the rest of this play-by-play part. The fact that Han, it was almost like they put it up as to where they were old friends. The only thing that we really flash back to was Solo, a Star Wars story, and clearly, they had an adversarial, somewhat frenemy thing going at best. What makes me wonder is if they were going to continue on with, say, Solo 2 and Solo 3, if we would have then seen somewhat of a bond. Because the thing that was interesting was when you watch Return of the Jedi, and I'm sure we're going to bring this up more when we deal with that, and maybe even a little bit when we deal with Rise of Skywalker, is that you could tell there was a foundational, deeper friendship and somewhat of an admiration between these two guys. Even though they were competitive, definitely, Return of the Jedi kind of shows that this wasn't just some new thing that came out. That it was almost like it was a reflection back on what they had before he thought he was betrayed by Lando, the Cloud City. So right now, though, from everything that we've seen, I mean, unless you go back into either the expanded universe books or some of the new canon books actually deal with it, you don't see a whole lot of the whole establishment between Lando and Han's friendship. So again, much like we were along the ride with Luke on the Dagobah scenes, we're kind of along the ride with Han specifically, but really the whole group when you start to get to the Cloud City thing, because we're finding out things when Han finds them out. You know, we see Lando, we're kind of like, I don't really know what's going on with this guy. And really, it would probably be more fair to say we're more in Leia's viewpoint or whatever, because, she doesn't know Lando. I mean, obviously, Han and Chewie had some history with them, but, you're just seeing this guy, being a little bit shifty, then all of a sudden he's being overly friendly. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, what's that all about? And that's what I think Lucas was trying to do, is create a little bit of a, is this guy on her side? Is he not on her side? And that, pretty much that tug of war goes on through the whole rest of the film.
Well, you realize one of the big things about Orlando is that he and Han, you can understand why he and Han are friends, frenemies, however you want to call it, because they're just the same, in a lot of different ways. They're both kind of like more selfish kind of people. They're kind of looking out for the betterment of themselves to a degree. Lando, granted, being the administrator of the facility of Cloud City, which is basically a mining colony where they mine for fuel. But,
Savannah
he
gas,
took
to be
great risk.
specific.
Yeah. And, he's responsible as a bit because he understands that, people are depending on his decisions, to make his decisions for their lives. So he understands that, and but at the same time, he's not gonna compromise that. And so that's kind of the position that he's in, where he has to make a decision like, okay, what's best for me and the people I provide for, versus, okay, this old friend that I haven't seen like a million years, who I don't know what he's got himself into again, because he knows Han has gotten himself into something yet again. Okay, how do I do this? How do I be true to both? And that's the situation that Orlando ends up being in. So there's a very interesting dichotomy when it comes to that, because he kind of has to try to, balance both of those. So I thought that was really cool. And of course, eventually, you know, Luke back on Dagobah, he kind of starts to realize, he starts to see, look, using the Force, starting to train more with Yoda. He starts to be able to look into the future now. We now know that in the Force, you can kind of see images or things of that's to come. And he saw, pain, suffering, and things like that of his friends, Leia and Han. And he kind of ultimately makes the decision, like, okay, I gotta go to him. Now, at this point, Obi-Wan has popped back up in spirit form, and he's kind of told Luke, like, look, you're not ready yet. He's like, oh, but I have the Force now. He's like, "Oh, but you don't know how to control it." And he's just like, well, if you go face Vader, I can't help you. I'm not going to be able to save you. You're going to have to do this on your own. And Luke kind of like, all right, well, fine. I get it. So Luke kind of just leaves Dagobah and heads towards Cloud City with a little bit of training that he has, on his side. And hopefully that's enough for what is to come. So, we eventually get Luke landing um on Cloud City. At this point, Han has already been tortured by Vader. Um,
Wait, though,
Vader's already made it.
before that, we got to get to the big scene that I always talk about, the biggest mystery, the dinner thing.
Yes.
Which of course,
lunch.
that was the part where, obviously the betrayal happened, right? Because up until that point, you basically had Lando giving him a tour, talking about how he kind of went straight and he's running into all these, typical bureaucratic issues and everything else. And And, Han's just like, wow, I can't believe that, you're saying all this stuff and, I can't believe you're the same guy or whatever. And all of a sudden the door opens and Vader stands there. And then, of course, Han, Leia, Chewie roars, he freaks out. And then, of course, Han, and this is the other cool scene. This is one of those, I don't know why, but all of us back in 1980 were obsessed with, well, what would happen if Han went up against Vader? I mean, we know now that it's, it wouldn't last very long, and here was proof. So, of course, Han instantly whips out his blaster, fires a couple of shots. Vader just holds his hand up, blocks him with the Force, and then takes his gun from him. And then, of course, has the whole, we would be honored if you would join us line. And it was really an interesting thing because, of course, Boba Fett comes out. And this is where you start to get this third act thing going where, again, like you had said, Daryl, when Luke eventually arrives, you're slowly bringing the group back together again, sort of. They're now at least on the same location. And, of course, Luke is single-minded. He just wants to help his friends. He wants to fight, kill Vader, and save the day. Whereas now you have Lando, who basically was railroaded. He didn't have any kind of a choice. And Lando, in his arrogance, thought that he could get them out of it. You could see that in little pieces of dialogue where, he was just kind of like, look, he doesn't even want you. He wants this guy, I don't know, Luke Skywalker or whatever. And he's, he made that little plan with Lobot or whatever and the security guards to kind of turn things around. And so Lando basically thought that, yes, this looks like a betrayal, but I'm going to fix this. This is a temporary situation. You'll see I've got this under control, which, of course, is like what Han says all the time. So then you can see why these two guys are friends. Then Han, of course, he's the whole shoot first mentality anyway. The biggest mystery that I have always wondered is they all sit down to eat this big dinner. What did they talk about? I can only imagine how awkward that dinner must have been. And forever that's been haunting me.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and to your point that you made a few moments ago, when Vader takes the blaster from Han, it makes it gives it more credence when he says it, in episode 7. It's like, oh, the Force is true, all of it. Vader, he has firsthand experience, just like, look, this guy.
Well, you did see, the look on his face, right? When his blaster flew out of his hand, he's a little bit what just happened?
Did that happen?
Right. And how did he block all those bolts? Because remember, Han Solo was one of the best shot. Not only is he one of the best pilots, he's one of the best marksmen in the galaxy. So he does not miss. And fast. So that was that is actually a good point.
Just to block it, it was just like,
that's a really good point.
Easily. And then he snatches the gun from him. And then, of course, Vader being Vader is so cool. We would be honored if you would join us.
I know, that was just...
He wasn't even frail. He wasn't even like frazzled by it. He was just like...
It's almost like, okay, are you done?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Can we get on now? You're basically not going to win this. Let me tell you how this is going to go.
Right. So, but to your question, what would they talk about? Obvious. Where's Luke? Because that's the one he's really looking for.
So, in thinking about this, you might be right. I have put some thought into this, and one of the things that I think was happening, because this dinner precedes what you had talked about, the whole torture scene and all this other stuff. It's probably, this is your chance for us to do this the nice way. We get a little of the Tina Turner, Ike Turner thing, nice and easy. Instead of, and now we're going to do it rough, When
you made that analogy, I took that completely.
Oh, really? Now I want to know.
Oh,
Yeah, I won't make you say it.
Left a good job. But anyway.
But that's what he was doing, though. He was probably giving him like, listen, I'm going to give you all a shot where you're just gonna pretty much tell me what I want to know, and
Yep.
maybe as a reward, I might let you walk out of here. And then, of
Right.
course, I'm sure dinner didn't go very well. I also wonder what was on the menu. I'm just imagining,
Right.
was Boba Fett like, pass me the potato, that kind of thing. I don't know. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just um it was a very awkward moment. I could definitely I know that's what the conversation had to be about, because I know they were like, okay, well, Han and Leia and everybody else is here that they usually roll, but where's Luke? And of course, probably some more information about the rebels and the bases and stuff like that. He wants to kind of be able to collect all that information while I have you, but really, where's Luke? You know,
And Leia's like,
so
you're not my father. You can't tell me what to do. And Vader's like, well, actually,
well, even Vader doesn't even know that yet,
that's true.
but
Vader does not know that. We'll get to that in the next film.
but so Luke finally arrives to Cloud City. He's looking for to find his friends Han and Leia and Chewie and everybody. And Vader's already kind of set the trap on him. But at this point, what has transpired is uh, Vader wants to, pretty much put Luke in carbonite and take him to the Emperor. But he wanted to test it to make sure that it wouldn't kill him. So he used Han as his guinea pig. He said, well, I don't care about this guy. So, in you go. And this is where we get like one of the greatest moments, in cinema history, where David expounded earlier, where you know Han is standing there handcuffed, about to be frozen, and Leia just lets out this, "Oh, I love you," and Han coolly back replies, "I know." And that was like one of the, of course, the coolest lines ever, because you're expecting him to say the typical "I love you too," and he doesn't.
Yeah, which was kind of ironically satisfying. But even before that, another thing that I thought was interesting, besides the fact that he obviously wanted to use the carbonite to test, to see if it would work for Skywalker. In other words, will it kill him or not? One of the things that I thought was really cool was when, Han got back. And again, you see this a little bit. There's a couple of things that we can point out in the Cloud City scenes. One, at this point in time, Leia and Han are fully engaged as a couple. She's being really tender to him. He's protective of her. I mean, they're obviously very much a couple at this point. And there's that scene, of course, where after Han is tortured, and of course he makes the joke, I feel terrible, which is typical him. And then she's kind of tending to his wounds or whatever, and then she's just like, why are they doing this to us? And of course he responds by, they didn't even ask me any questions. And that's because he was trying to inflict pain on Han so that would trip through the Force Luke and make him even want to come there even more to save his friends. It was all a trap. They were completely disposable to Vader. He didn't even care about him. And then, of course, Lando is trying to, again, enact his plan, which keeps going wrong. And, of course, Vader keeps changing everything on him. So right when Lando thinks that, hey, I've got all this under control, things keep changing. So, Lando's going to Han and Leia and just saying, look, I've got some plans. This is good. And you can feel Lando's pain because he's definitely trying to fix what he knew he should never have done. So I really thought that was all these cool things that are going on throughout this whole scene. And then, of course, there's a whole 3PO thing, too, where, the Ugnaughts
Yeah,
get
I
him.
mean,
And there's just so much in just this little scene. This is even before we get to the lightsaber duel, there's just a lot to
yeah,
this.
I mean, there's a lot that I'm trying to take care of a lot. I mean, granted, because if we went through everything, I mean, it would probably
I
take
know,
us
it'd be
like
like a
6 hours,
4-hour
probably.
show. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, you had the flirtation with Lando with Leia, even though he kind of assumed that Han was with Leia, but he was still flirting with her. I mean, you could definitely tell the relationship growth, because there'll be moments where the body language was, um, it was Leia when she had her hair out in those weird braids, but she actually like grabbed Han's arm, and she's like, "Oh, as they walked out," and just certain things. Like, Han was definitely not threatened by Lando at all. He's like, no, I've got the girl, she's mine. He carried that bravado. Um, so all of that kind of compiles, like you said, into this whole little area where, now that Luke is, well, now we're at the point where Vader sends Han down to be frozen in carbonite. He comes back up. Lando checks him out, say, yep, he's alive and he's in perfect hibernation. And so then Vader's like, all right, we'll reset it for Skywalker, and make sure that he finds his way into that room. So at that point, Luke has arrived at Cloud City. He's moving around. He's trying to find him. He actually does run into Leia and Chewie, and Leia warns. She's shouting to him like it's a trap, And
see,
Luke
it was not Akbar that said it first. And she even said it multiple times, and nobody ever gave her the whole thing. It was always attributed to Akbar. I know, it's a trap. But she's like, look, it's a trap. It's a trap. I know, it's
Akbar sounded cooler doing it.
Yeah, I know. But I just think that was funny though, because honestly, that did not occur to me until this second. I mean, when you were talking about that, and I started, I'm like, wait a minute, she said that first.
Yeah, just like Han shot first, Leia said it first. So now Luke is kind of like, all right, I'm trying to find my way, to Leia, and then he ends up in the whole little room where Eric has had this the image that we've been looking at all night for Empire.
There it is.
Yes, this one here. Yes, this is the room where they froze Han in carbonite, and this is where Eric's very popular Christmas ornament utters the line,
the Force is strong with you, young Skywalker, but you're not a Jedi yet.
Not a Jedi yet.
Yeah.
And so at this moment,
favorite line of the entire franchise, actually.
Yeah, and Vader's just standing. You just see this black silhouette just standing there, just strong, confident. Luke is walking up, ignites his lightsaber, and then they begin to just immediately kind of get into this whole duel. And Vader obviously is taunting him. He's trying to make Luke angry. He's trying to make him kind of disheveled a little bit. And you could tell that Vader is really toying with him because he only has one hand on the lightsaber. Luke's got two hands firmly on it. And Vader is just parrying and defending all of Luke's little strikes or whatever. And even knocks Luke down a flight of steps, to which Vader jumps down. Luke is backing up, and he falls into Vader's little trap, to which Vader utters the line, all too easy, uses the Force, try to hit the switch. But impressively, Luke uses the Force himself and does this miraculous jump straight out of there. I mean, this guy's had 82-inch vertical on this jump, and he's climbing these cables, and Vader's kind of impressed by that. Like, wow, all right, you've got some skill. All right, you're not as green as I thought you would have been.
Yeah, but my favorite unintentional line from this whole thing, that I just think it's funny. It's a meme that's gone around, and it's basically where when he was doing the impressive, most impressive, and Luke does that flip over him, and Luke is basically at the top of the stairs, and Vader is at the bottom, and he says, "Obi-Wan has taught you well."
Because he has the high ground.
Because he has the high ground, exactly. I mean, now I know, being that was written in 1980, but you do have to laugh though at the whole just coincidence of that, because yeah, that was great when he's looking at Luke up on the steps, going, "Oh, Obi-Wan's taught you well."
Well, that was in Return of the Jedi though.
No, the meme was in this, because it was, if you look, Vader is at the bottom, Luke is at the top. He does that whole thing to where he flips up, does something.
Well, they got the lines wrong at least, but
I'll send that meme to you. No, he says Obi-Wan has taught you well in The Empire Strikes Back. He says that all the time. That was one of the other things that I thought was really interesting, because In Empire, I sort of let it go because my friends and I would discuss the whole Yoda thing, because when he kept saying that, we knew even during this time that, oh, they don't know that Yoda's around. And then, of course, by Return of the Jedi, when he's still saying it, it's like, wow, he really doesn't realize. And actually, what was funny was, and they showed some artwork or whatever, because the original ending of Return of the Jedi, and I'll get into this in more detail in our next show, but next Monday show, because the original ending of Return of the Jedi was supposed to be that when Luke was, basically starting to lose or whatever, Obi-Wan and Yoda's Force Ghost were going to appear, and they were going to fight Palpatine. That's how the original ending was supposed to go. It's part of the reason why it was called Revenge of the Jedi. So that would have been really poignant, because obviously they didn't even realize that Yoda was still around. So I thought that was kind of cool. But, again, that's the next one.
But in this whole exchange of, Vader, so basically you have two things going on. You got Han, now you got Leia and Lando and Chewie and Art, trying to find Han's, carbonite encased body, and they're trying to stop him from being delivered to Jabba. And then you have this battle waging on between Luke and Vader. And in this sense where Vader is still toying with Luke, he's trying to see where Luke is skill wise. So he's already kind of tested him with the lightsaber, seeing where his skills were there. Now he's going to test him with the Force. So then now he starts using the Force, picking up stuff, throwing it at him, seeing how Luke responds to it. Eventually knocks out this window, which sucks Luke out of the window. And now Luke is kind of hanging on this rail for dear life. And then he eventually climbs himself back up. Vader then again attacks him again, but this time way more vehemently. And he's putting the pressure on Luke. And Luke is doing pretty well matching him, as far as, strike for strike. And even lands an actual nice little strike on dear old dad on the shoulder. And during this whole exchange, that's when Vader ends up lopping off Luke's hand and told Luke that he's beaten. And Luke still triumphantly fights on. And he eventually kind of is at this crossroads where he has Vader on one side and he has nothing but the bottom of this shaft that he's standing on. And he has to make a choice. Do I, surrender and give myself over to Vader and, have to deal with that? Or do I just fall and kill myself? And then that way, hey, I gave it my best shot.
Well, not only
But
that,
it's
but
in
then
this moment, though.
you couldn't use anything against him. I mean, he probably was looking at the idea that if you were captured, because that scene is really interesting, primarily for the reason that, again, we're seeing this through Luke, it was so hopeless. I mean, when he was just hanging there, on those bars or whatever below Cloud City, and he's pretty severely injured. He has no hope. This is almost mirroring what happened to Yoda in a way at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And much like what happened with Yoda at the Revenge of the Sith, when, he's calling for bail on his little radio or whatever, and then, ship comes up and he gets saved. He's calling out, Luke is calling out to the Force and trying to contact Leia. And this is the first time that we really get a glimpse into, I guess Leia's there's a connection between these two. Now, at the time, we thought maybe it was because of some romantic thing. Because then when he does finally get on the Falcon, she kisses his head and all this stuff. And now you're like, okay, make up your mind, woman. But basically, I think that what happened is that you, as the audience member, feel that same hopelessness that Luke felt. And I think that that's really where it it was just great filmmaking because
Oh yeah,
usually you always know the hero is going to make it, you know? But you're just kind of like, man, how's he going to get out of this? And that's when
right.
he calls
Because
for
at this,
Leia.
yeah, and prior to this, like after he has his hand lopped off, this is when we get the big start on revelation that, Vader is trying to tempt him to the dark side. Um, he basically tells him, with our combined strength, I can complete your training, and we can overthrow the Emperor. And then Luke was like, I'll never join you. And Vader's like, if you only knew the power of the dark side, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. Luke, tries to smartly reply, he told me enough. He told me you killed him. And then here comes the big revelation when Vader says, no, I am your father. Now, when I heard that as a kid, I was like, whoa, how? Like, I
Yeah,
just had so
right?
many questions
Well,
as a
then you're
kid.
kind of
Like,
like, well, who's the mother? Were you always in the
yeah,
suit? How did that work?
exactly. It's like,
Was it kind of
okay,
like an L3 thing? It works, that kind of
right.
thing. But the other thing
And
that
then
would have been great that I always thought was funny, and it's too bad we didn't. It would have been great if, after he says, no, I'm your father or whatever, or before that when he says, he told me enough, he told me you killed him. Part of me almost wishes the line had been like, oh, let me guess. Did he use that whole certain point of view line on you too? Or
or like just been like typical Obi-Wan or something
yeah,
like that.
exactly. It's like, well, of course he did, you know?
Yeah, right. you know. And then of course I thought he was lying the whole
Yeah, I
time.
think everybody did. Because
I
look,
thought he was
Vader's
lying. I
not
thought he was
above
just messing with
tactics, you know?
yeah, I thought he was just messing with Luke's head or whatever once
Mm-hmm.
again
Sure,
to
getting
try to
inside of it,
convince him.
that would have been a great
Yeah.
tactic.
Yeah.
I mean,
But,
it would have been kind of maybe thinking of that at the 11th hour, like, huh, ooh, I know, I'll tell him I'm his dad. That'll freak him out. But I
you
was thinking
know.
the same thing. And, when we were, and of course, unlike you, who could just pop in the next videotape, we actually had to wait 3 years for the answer because the biggest
Mhm.
debate between 80 and 83 was, you know, was, well,
Mhm.
first of all, there was a whole mystery of who shot JR, but, that's a different franchise. But the big thing was Luke really his father? And we were all convinced that he wasn't. So naturally, when Yoda confirms it in Return of the Jedi, we're all like, whoa, no way. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was a big thing.
So yeah, eventually, like you said, Luke falls. He decides to give himself up. He's like, I'd rather die than join, you, dear old dad. And as the force would have it, he ends up falling through this little chute and lands out on these like what looks like a telephone pole or some sort of communications tower pole, which had to hurt, man, because the way he hit that thing with the back of his knees,
Oh, I know.
man.
I know.
But
You're just kind of
he's like
like,
he's
ugh.
you see him dangling there, and he's trying
That's
to
what
like
I
he's calling out
meant
for Ben.
earlier when I said that, it's like, because yeah, that was part of it too that I'd sort of forgotten about. But you're right. I mean, he hit that thing with a thud, and you could just feel like that would have just
Yeah,
hurt so bad. And you're just thinking like, how hopeless is this? Who's going to come and
yeah,
rescue this guy?
he's calling out for Ben, and he realizes, yeah, Ben's not coming. He told me he can't help me. So
Hmm.
then he's just like, okay, well, hear me, Leia, which made me wonder, like, why did he call for Leia?
I
Like,
know that's the thing.
and that is always what I was like, okay, why did he call for Han or whatever, or why didn't he, But anyway, Leia
Or
feels
call for
Luke
Obi-Wan.
calling.
Because
He did.
Obi-Wan's the one
He
that
did at
was.
first. Well, he did at first.
Well,
That's
he
what I'm
did.
saying.
Yeah,
Like
that's right. He did kind of go, Ben. And then Ben wasn't
then he,
answering. He was like, all right, who
yeah.
else it might be on? But you think like Yoda or, I mean, how
But
about
they
trying
both
the
kind of
force
told him
using
before they
guys?
left. Yeah, he told him before they left, like, look, man, you're on your own, dude. I mean, I'm
Well,
just
that's
telling you
true.
now.
That's true. It'd be kind
So
of like,
give
all
me
right, All right,
Try,
I lost my little
try
force
to.
black book here.
That's why he told you, remember your failure at the cave. Like, remember, I
Mm-hmm.
tried to tell you, you didn't want to listen to me. Like,
You gotta
you're putting
wonder if
yourself
when he
out
went
there.
back, because there was canonical things that Lucas said that when he went back for Return of the Jedi, that wasn't really the only time he went back. You would think so because it's kind of like I got a promise to keep to my old friend or whatever. But I guess he went back periodically or something.
Hmm.
But you would always have to wonder that if he went back like that, I mean, did they just lay into him like I told you, idiot?
Like, well, it's a good thing, and I'm getting to that part. So when Leia finally gets Lando to kind of turn the ship around and go back to go get Luke, they retrieve him. He comes back in. They put this little device, I guess, on his missing hand or missing arm. Well, it was where his hand was, but anyway. Um, and they eventually kind of fly off to safety, to which we end up at the medical frigate where Lucas getting a new hand put on, which is probably good because if he'd have showed up with, to Yoda, like missing a hand, you know, Yoda probably really have been like, oh yeah, you're really like your dad now. Um, but we see Luke getting tended to on the medical frigate. He's there with Leia. They're testing his new hand out, his new robotic hand, and um, after that, we kind of see her, or Leia and Luke, kind of talking to Lando and the Falcon, and they're kind of like, all right, I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on Tatooine, and um, eventually, they kind of just like fly off into the sunrise or whatever, and
But I gotta point this out
yep.
because this is something, and you know what I'm gonna say.
Oh yes, yes
This
I
is
do.
something that has freaked everybody, and we did. I don't remember. This was part of a show like top 10. It's a top 10 something like weirdest. I don't know. But one of the weirdest things is that at the end of this, Lando is wearing Han's clothes. That's just not okay to me. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, I get it. Maybe, you wanted to change or whatever, had to flee Cloud City in a hurry. You didn't have anything else. You look in the
Yeah, had a
closet of
chance
the
to
Millennium
pack.
Falcon. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't really wearing that particular outfit. He was wearing the Hoth outfit, then he had the Bespin outfit. So the New Hope outfit was available, and apparently it fit pretty good. But it was just bizarre. I don't know if they were doing that to tie the thing in. Like, well, I guess if you're doing the Falcon thing, you gotta wear the uniform. I don't know. I just
Yeah, the
always
uniform
thought
and
that was
everything.
really weird. Yeah, exactly. Before we've already gotten too far, but Ronaldo says, referring to the Vader Luke fight, he said that is my favorite lightsaber fight, and I would probably have to agree with that because I think that was the one. Even though you could argue, I guess the Return of the Jedi one had more emotional weight and was a little bit more, I don't know, intense in some ways.
Hmm.
I would venture to say that's, I don't know if it's my favorite one, but it's definitely up there. And of course, he points out that Vader looks very calm in this one. Because, yeah, Vader, I mean, he was surprised, I think, by how far along Luke was. But at the same time, he was pretty confident, like, all right, this guy is not going to take me out. He's not there yet. Next
Yeah.
movie, a little different story. Now he's two-handed, you know. It's like, okay, I can still beat this guy, but I gotta put a little bit more effort into it. This looks way more powerful,
Right.
which of course next Monday we'll talk all about that. But yeah, I just thought that it was weird that, I mean, first of all, it was cool when Luke got the new hand, because I was wondering back when I first saw it, I'm sure you were too. It's like, okay, well, he has his hand lopped off. What are they gonna do? I mean, are they gonna just we're gonna get like a handless Skywalker for the next film, or but when he actually had that photorealistic, hand that he was ow,
Hmm.
ow, and he was, like in there and he
Hmm.
ended up closing
You
it
see all
up
the
and
little switches. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I thought that was kind of cool that, obviously they had their prosthetic game was on point and
Yep.
you know, everything was cool. So I thought that, hey, this is good. This is good.
Absolutely. But that's Empire Strikes Back, ladies and gentlemen. We did this little over about 2 hours on the nose of
pretty much. Hour and 59. Could almost do the
which is about
New Year's Eve
about as long
countdown
as the
thing.
movie.
Yeah.
It's about as long as the movie, really. But
It's getting there. Almost.
Yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Hopefully you guys learned some things you might not have known beforehand, or has had some things explained to you deeper that you didn't consider before. So this was fun. We got one more. Well, not just one more, but one more in the original trilogy, and that's the Return of the Jedi, which we'll, as Eric said, we'll cover next Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then don't forget, of course, to tune in Friday. It's Friday at 8. We're going to be reviewing the first. Well, I think they're doing the first 2, but Bad Batch season 2 starts on Wednesday. So
yes, sir.
We're going to be reviewing that for you guys, and then next Monday we're going to be doing an in-depth analysis of Return of the Jedi, where we'll actually have to address the Ewoks. But there's some cool things about them. I won't spoil it now.
So, but if you like what you see, then please don't hesitate to put that in the comment section. Make sure you like our page. Make sure you like this, all of our content that we have for you on headtohead.com. I'm sorry, not .com.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't have a website.
We used to.
We did used to.
Well, on head-to-head.
But even then, it was head-to-head SW. So remember, our handles are head-to-head SW. You can see that on our social media. We're head-to-head SW on YouTube even. Although if you're here, you probably already know where to find us. Like Daryl said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Go back and look at some of our other content. If you missed, like I said at the beginning of the show, if you missed any of our shows in this series, What is Star Wars? We've done 2 of them. Well, now we've done 3 of them. We did the Legacy. We reviewed and did an in-depth analysis of A New Hope last week. We just wrapped up our Empire Strikes Back. Go and check it out. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share it. It really helps us out, too, if you guys share this content on your own social media. Maybe spark another discussion. Let us know how it goes. All right, well, with that, we're going to be excited to bring you guys Season 2 of The Bad Batch starting Friday. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always. Happy.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.